The story of the dinosaurs begins not with the dinosaurs themselves, but with the world that preceded them, a world that was slowly recovering from one of the greatest catastrophes in the history of life on Earth. 252 million years ago, during the transition from the Permian period to the Triassic period, the planet experienced a mass extinction so severe that it eliminated more than 90% of all marine species and approximately 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species. This event, known as the Permian-Triassic extinction, or sometimes called the Great Dying, reshaped life on Earth in fundamental ways and created the conditions that would eventually allow dinosaurs to evolve and flourish. The causes of this extinction were complex and unfolded over hundreds of thousands of years. Massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia released enormous quantities of lava, covering an area of millions of square kilometers with layers of basalt hundreds of meters thick. These eruptions also released vast amounts of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and other gases into the atmosphere, triggering rapid climate change, ocean acidification, and widespread disruption of ecosystems both on land and in the sea. The oceans lost much of their oxygen, a condition called anoxia, making them uninhabitable for most marine life. Acid rain fell on the land, damaging plants and soils. Temperatures rose dramatically in some regions while becoming unstable and unpredictable in others. The recovery from this extinction was slow and gradual, measured not in years or decades, but in millions of years. The earliest Triassic period was a time of diminished biodiversity, with ecosystems simplified and many ecological roles left vacant by the disappearance of the organisms that had previously filled them. The climate during the early Triassic was generally hot and dry, with intense seasonal variations and with aridity extending across much of the supercontinent Pangaea, which at that time comprised nearly all of Earth's landmasses, joined together in a single vast expanse of rock and soil surrounded by a single global ocean. In this recovering world, life slowly began to rebuild itself. The survivors of the extinction, those organisms fortunate enough or adaptable enough to persist through the catastrophe, began to diversify, evolving into new forms and exploring the ecological opportunities that had opened up with the disappearance of so many other species. Among these survivors were various groups of reptiles, creatures that had evolved during the Carboniferous and Permian periods, and that possessed certain advantages for survival in the harsh conditions of the early Triassic world. One particularly successful group of reptiles during the Triassic period was the archosaurs, a lineage characterized by certain skeletal features including openings in the skull in front of the eyes and additional openings in the lower jaw. These openings reduced the weight of the skull while maintaining structural strength, and they also provided space for attachment of powerful jaw muscles. The archosaurs would diversify during the Triassic period into many different forms, ranging from small, lightly built animals to large, heavily built predators and herbivores, and they would eventually give rise to several major groups including the crocodilians, the pterosaurs, and the dinosaurs. The early archosaurs of the Triassic period were diverse in their body forms and their ways of life. Some were quadrupedal, walking on all four legs with their limbs sprawled out to the sides in the manner typical of most reptiles. Others had evolved a more upright posture, with their limbs positioned more directly beneath their bodies, a configuration that allowed for more efficient locomotion and reduced the energy cost of movement. Some early archosaurs were bipedal, walking primarily on their hind legs and using their forelimbs for grasping objects or capturing prey rather than for locomotion. Among the early archosaurs were various groups that would become extinct before the end of the Triassic period, leaving no living descendants but playing important roles in Triassic ecosystems. The Rauisuchians were large predatory archosaurs, some reaching lengths of 6 meters or more, with powerful jaws and sharp teeth. These animals were the apex predators in many early and middle Triassic ecosystems, hunting other reptiles and possibly early dinosaurs. The Etosaurs were heavily armored herbivorous archosaurs, their backs and sides covered with thick bony plates that provided protection from predators. They ranged in size from about 1 meter to more than 5 meters in length and were common in many late Triassic environments. The crocodilian lineage diverged from other archosaurs early in the Triassic period. The early members of this lineage were quite different from modern crocodiles and alligators in many respects. Some were terrestrial predators with long legs and relatively upright posture, capable of running on land to chase prey. Others were herbivores with specialized teeth for processing plant material. Still others were already adapting to semi-aquatic lifestyles, spending time both in water and on land, the lifestyle that would eventually become characteristic of most later crocodilians. Another major group of archosaurs that appeared during the Triassic period was the pterosaurs, the flying reptiles that would dominate the skies throughout the Mesozoic era. The earliest pterosaurs appeared in the late Triassic period, around 220 million years ago, and they were already fully adapted for powered flight. Even with wings formed from membranes of skin and other tissues stretched from an enormously elongated fourth finger to the body and hind limbs. Their bones were hollow, reducing their weight, and they possessed large breastbones for the attachment of flight muscles. The evolution of flight in pterosaurs represents a remarkable transformation, though the intermediate stages between terrestrial ancestors and fully flying pterosaurs have not yet been found in the fossil record, leaving the details of this transition somewhat mysterious. The dinosaurs themselves first appeared during the middle portion of the Triassic period, probably around 235 to 230 million years ago. Although the exact timing is uncertain, because the earliest dinosaur fossils are rare and sometimes difficult to distinguish from those of closely related non-dinosaurian archosaurs. The first dinosaurs were relatively small animals, mostly measuring 1 to 2 meters in length, and they were bipedal, walking on their hind legs with their forelimbs free for other uses. These early dinosaurs were carnivorous, feeding on small prey such as insects, small reptiles, and perhaps the young of larger animals. The features that distinguish dinosaurs from other archosaurs are primarily seen in the skeleton, particularly in the structure of the hip and ankle joints. In dinosaurs, the hip socket is fully open, meaning there's a hole in the pelvis through which the head of the femur, the thigh bone, passes. This configuration allowed for a fully upright posture, with the legs positioned directly beneath the body rather than sprawled out to the sides. This upright posture made locomotion more efficient, allowing dinosaurs to walk and run with less energy expenditure than animals with sprawling limbs, and it also allowed for longer strides and potentially higher speeds. The ankle joint in dinosaurs is also distinctive, forming a simple hinge that allows for efficient forward and backward movement while restricting side-to-side motion. This type of ankle joint is well suited for bipedal locomotion and for the upright posture characteristic of dinosaurs. These skeletal features, while they may seem like minor anatomical details, had significant functional consequences and helped give dinosaurs certain advantages in locomotion compared to other reptiles. Despite these advantages, dinosaurs remained relatively rare and ecologically marginal during much of the Triassic period. The terrestrial ecosystems of the early and middle Triassic were dominated by other groups of archosaurs, particularly the Rauisuchians and various crocodilian relatives. These animals occupied most of the ecological roles that would later be filled by dinosaurs, serving as large predators, large herbivores, and medium-sized omnivores. The dinosaurs during this early phase of their history were simply one group among many, not obviously destined for the dominance they would later achieve. The early dinosaurs can be divided into two major lineages based on the structure of their hips. The Saurischian dinosaurs, or lizard-hipped dinosaurs, retained a hip structure in which the pubis bone points forward and downward. The Ornithischian dinosaurs, or bird-hipped dinosaurs, evolved a hip structure in which the pubis bone points backward, running parallel to the ischium. The terminology here is somewhat confusing because birds actually evolved from Saurischian dinosaurs, specifically from a group of theropod dinosaurs, despite the fact that bird hips superficially resemble those of Ornithischian dinosaurs. This similarity is an example of convergent evolution, where unrelated groups independently evolve similar features. The Saurischian dinosaurs themselves divided early in their evolutionary history into two distinct lineages. The theropods were bipedal carnivores that would eventually include some of the most famous dinosaurs, including Tyrannosaurus rex, Velociraptor, and Allosaurus, as well as the birds, which evolved from small theropod ancestors during the Jurassic period. The sauropodomorphs were the other major Saurischian lineage, and they included the prosauropods of the late Triassic and early Jurassic periods, as well as the sauropods, the enormous long-necked herbivorous dinosaurs that would become characteristic of Jurassic and Cretaceous landscapes. The earliest theropods were small, slender animals with long legs, long necks, grasping hands with sharp claws, and skulls filled with small, sharp teeth. These dinosaurs were probably swift runners, capable of pursuing and capturing small, agile prey. Coelophysis, from the late Triassic period of what is now New Mexico, is one of the best-known early theropods. This dinosaur was about 3 meters in length and very lightly built, with hollow bones that reduced its weight to perhaps 15 to 30 kilograms. Coelophysis had a long, narrow skull with many small, pointed teeth, well suited for capturing and holding small prey such as lizards, small archosaurs, and perhaps large insects. Fossils of Coelophysis have been found in large numbers at a site called Ghost Ranch in New Mexico, where hundreds of individuals were preserved together, possibly killed and buried during a flash flood. The presence of so many individuals in one place has led some paleontologists to suggest that Coelophysis may have been a social animal living in groups, though it is also possible that the accumulation simply represents individuals that happen to be in the same area when the flood occurred, perhaps drawn to a water source during a time of drought. The sauropodomorphs appeared during the late Triassic period and quickly became more diverse and abundant than the theropods. The earliest sauropodomorphs, sometimes called basal sauropodomorphs or prosauropods, were medium-sized herbivorous dinosaurs, generally ranging from about 2 to 10 meters in length. These animals were probably capable of both quadrupedal and bipedal locomotion, walking on all fours when feeding on low vegetation, but able to rear up on their hind legs to reach higher vegetation or to move more quickly. Their teeth were somewhat flattened and serrated, adapted for cutting and processing plant material. Though some paleontologists have suggested that prosauropods may have been omnivorous, supplementing their diet with small animals. Plateosaurus was one of the most common and widespread prosauropods of the late Triassic period. This dinosaur lived in what is now Europe and reached lengths of about 8 to 10 meters and weights estimated at around 4 tons. Platysaurus had a relatively small head on a moderately long neck, a large barrel-shaped body to accommodate the digestive system needed to process plant material, and a long tail. Its forelimbs were shorter than its hind limbs, but were still substantial and bore large claws that may have been used for defense against predators or for pulling down branches to access foliage. Many specimens of Plateosaurus have been discovered, providing paleontologists with detailed information about the variation within this species and about how these animals grew and developed. Young Plateosaurus were much smaller than adults, as would be expected, but the proportions of their bodies also changed as they grew, with juveniles having relatively larger heads and shorter necks than adults. This type of growth pattern, where body proportions change during development, is common in many animals and reflects different functional requirements at different life stages. The ornithischian dinosaurs also appeared during the Triassic period, though they would remain relatively rare and not particularly diverse until later in the Mesozoic era. All ornithischian dinosaurs were herbivores, and the group would eventually include many well-known dinosaurs such as Stegosaurus, Triceratops, Iguanodon, and the hadrosaurs. The earliest ornithischians were small bipedal animals with relatively simple teeth compared to later members of the group. Pisanosaurus from the late Triassic of Argentina is one of the earliest known ornithischians, a small dinosaur only about 1 meter in length, known from fragmentary remains that make it difficult to reconstruct its appearance and lifestyle in detail. During the late Triassic period, the dinosaurs began to diversify and become somewhat more common, but they still remained relatively minor components of most terrestrial ecosystems. The dominant large land animals during the late Triassic were not dinosaurs, but rather other groups of archosaurs. The large predatory Rauisuchians were the top carnivores in most ecosystems, hunting the various herbivorous reptiles that were abundant during this time. The heavily armored Eddosaurs were common herbivores, browsing on vegetation and probably living in groups for protection. Various crocodilian relatives occupied a range of ecological roles, and early mammals, which had evolved from synapsid reptiles during the late Triassic, were present but remained small and probably nocturnal. The plant life of the late Triassic period consisted primarily of gymnosperms, seed-bearing plants that include conifers, cycads, ginkgos, and various extinct groups. Conifers, relatives of modern pines, firs, and redwoods, were diverse and abundant, forming forests in many regions. These trees produced cones containing seeds and had needle-like or scale-like leaves. Cycads, palm-like plants with thick trunks and crowns of large, stiff leaves were also common, particularly in tropical and subtropical regions. Ginkgos, represented today by a single species but diverse during the Mesozoic era, had fan-shaped leaves and were widespread during the late Triassic and Jurassic periods. Ferns and fern allies, plants that reproduce by spores rather than seeds, carpeted the forest floors and grew in open areas, particularly in moist environments near rivers and lakes. These plants provided food for herbivorous animals, though processing tough, fibrous plant material presented challenges for reptilian digestive systems, which are generally less efficient at extracting nutrients from plant matter than mammalian digestive systems. Herbivorous reptiles of the Triassic period evolved various adaptations to deal with these challenges, including specialized teeth for cutting or grinding vegetation, powerful jaw muscles, and in some cases digestive systems that relied on microbial fermentation to break down plant cell walls and make nutrients accessible. The climate of the late Triassic period remained generally warm and dry, with seasonal monsoons bringing rainfall to some regions, but with extensive arid zones in the interior of Pangaea. The lack of polar ice meant that ocean currents and atmospheric circulation patterns were different from those of today, and the arrangement of the continents in a single supercontinent affected climate in ways that are difficult for us to imagine, as we are accustomed to a world with continents spread across the globe and with extensive ocean basins between them. Thus, the late Triassic period came to an end around 201 million years ago, with another mass extinction event, less severe than the end Permian extinction, but still significant in its effects on life. This extinction, known as the Triassic-Jurassic extinction or end Triassic extinction, eliminated many groups of animals and opened up ecological opportunities that would be exploited by the survivors, particularly the dinosaurs. The causes of this extinction are still being investigated by geologists and paleontologists, but massive volcanic eruptions associated with the breakup of Pangaea, which was beginning to split into separate landmasses during this time, probably played a major role. The volcanic eruptions occurred over an extended period, perhaps hundreds of thousands of years, and they were concentrated in what is now the Atlantic Ocean region, along the rift where North America was separating from Africa and South America was separating from Africa. These eruptions, known as the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, or CAMP, released enormous volumes of lava, covering hundreds of thousands of square kilometers, and also released large amounts of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and other gases into the atmosphere. The environmental effects of these eruptions would have been severe, with climate change, acid rain, and ocean acidification affecting ecosystems both on land and in the sea. The end Triassic extinction eliminated many groups of animals that had been dominant during the Triassic period. Most of the large non-dinosaurian archosaurs went extinct, including the Rauisuchians and most of the Atosaurs. Many species of marine reptiles disappeared. Numerous groups of invertebrates, particularly those that built calcium carbonate shells or skeletons, suffered heavy losses as ocean acidification made it difficult for these organisms to maintain their shells. The extinction occurred relatively rapidly by geological standards, probably over a few 100,000 years, and recovery of ecosystems took millions of years. The dinosaurs, along with crocodilians, pterosaurs, mammals, lizards, turtles, and various other groups, survived this extinction. In the aftermath of the extinction, during the early Jurassic period, the dinosaurs underwent a dramatic diversification, expanding into ecological roles that had previously been occupied by other groups and evolving new body forms and adaptations. This marked the true beginning of the age of dinosaurs, the time when these reptiles became the dominant large land animals, a position they would maintain for approximately 135 million years. The Jurassic period began around 201 million years ago and lasted until approximately 145 million years ago. This period is often considered the classic age of dinosaurs, the time when these animals achieved their greatest diversity of forms and when some of the most iconic dinosaur groups flourished. The supercontinent Pangaea continued to break apart during the Jurassic period, with the northern landmass called Laurasia separating from the southern landmass called Gondwana. The Tethys Sea, a large ocean that had formed between these landmasses, expanded, and new ocean basins began to form as the continents separated. The climate of the Jurassic period was generally warm and humid, warmer than today, with less difference in temperature between the poles and the equator. There was no ice at the poles, and forests extended to high latitudes. Sea levels were generally higher than at present, and shallow seas covered portions of what are now continents, creating extensive coastal environments and islands. The warm, humid climate supported lush vegetation, and forests of conifers, cycads, ginkgos, and ferns covered much of the land, providing abundant food for herbivorous dinosaurs. The sauropodomorphs underwent a major evolutionary transition during the early Jurassic period, giving rise to the true sauropods, the giant long-necked herbivorous dinosaurs that would become among the most characteristic animals of the Jurassic period. The sauropods evolved from prosauropod ancestors, becoming fully quadrupedal, unable to rear up on their hind legs for extended periods, and developing the distinctive body plan that would characterize the group: a very small head on an extremely long neck, a massive barrel-shaped body supported by pillar-like legs, and a long, muscular tail. The evolution of gigantic body size in sauropods is one of the most remarkable features of dinosaur evolution, and one that has puzzled and fascinated paleontologists for many years. The earliest sauropods of the early Jurassic period were moderately large, perhaps 10 to 15 meters in length and weighing several tons. But sauropods of the middle and late Jurassic period included animals that reached lengths of 25 to 30 meters or more, and weights estimated at 30 to 80 metric tons, making them the largest land animals ever to have existed. Several anatomical and physiological features enabled sauropods to reach such enormous sizes. Their respiratory system was highly efficient, similar in structure to that of modern birds, with air sacs extending into their bones and body cavity. This system allowed for continuous airflow through the lungs, meaning that fresh air was passing through the lungs during both inhalation and exhalation, extracting oxygen more efficiently than the mammalian respiratory system, where air flows in and out of the same passages. The air sacs also reduced the overall density of the sauropod body by filling spaces with air rather than solid tissue, making these enormous animals somewhat lighter than they would otherwise have been. The bones of sauropods were constructed with internal spaces and struts, a design that provided strength while minimizing weight. This architecture is similar in principle to that used in modern steel frame buildings, where relatively thin structural elements are arranged in ways that distribute loads efficiently. The long bones of sauropod limbs were essentially hollow tubes with reinforcing ridges and struts inside, a design that was both strong and light. The vertebrae were particularly complex, with numerous openings and pockets that housed air sacs, reducing the weight of the spine while maintaining the structural strength needed to support the long neck and tail. Sauropods did not chew their food in the way that modern herbivorous mammals do. Instead, they used their teeth to crop vegetation, nipping off leaves and branches, and then swallowed this material whole or in large chunks. The teeth of sauropods varied in shape among different groups, with some having peg-like or pencil-like teeth and others having spoon-shaped or spatulate teeth. But all sauropods lacked the grinding teeth seen in many other herbivorous dinosaurs and in herbivorous mammals. The processing of food occurred in the digestive system rather than in the mouth. To aid in digestion, sauropods swallowed stones called gastroliths, which remained in the stomach or gizzard and helped to grind up plant material mechanically. Gastroliths have been found in association with sauropod skeletons, usually highly polished from grinding against each other and against tough plant fibers. Sauropods also relied on microbial fermentation in their digestive systems to break down plant cell walls and extract nutrients from vegetation that would otherwise be indigestible. This process requires a large fermentation chamber, which helps explain the enormous size of sauropod bodies, as much of the body cavity was occupied by a very long digestive tract. The long neck of sauropods served several functions. Most obviously, it allowed these animals to reach vegetation over a wide area without having to move their massive bodies, reducing energy expenditure while feeding. Third, a sauropod could stand in one spot and sweep its head in an arc, accessing all the vegetation within reach of its neck before needing to take a step. The long neck also allowed sauropods to feed at different heights, from ground level to perhaps 5 or 6 meters or even higher in some species, enabling them to exploit a vertical range of vegetation and potentially reducing competition between different species or between individuals of different ages feeding in the same area. Different sauropod groups had differently shaped necks and heads, suggesting they fed in different ways and on different types of vegetation. Some sauropods had necks that were held relatively horizontally, suggesting they fed primarily on low vegetation, while others could hold their necks more vertically, enabling them to browse on tall trees. Some sauropods had broad, blunt teeth suitable for stripping leaves from branches, while others had narrower, more delicate teeth that may have been used for more selective feeding on particular types of foliage. Brachiosaurus was one of the most distinctive sauropods of the late Jurassic period. This dinosaur had front legs that were longer than its hind legs, giving it a sloping back that rose toward the shoulders rather than toward the hips as in most dinosaurs. This unusual body proportion allowed Brachiosaurus to hold its neck in a more vertical position than most other sauropods, and it suggests that this animal fed primarily on tall vegetation, perhaps the tops of conifer trees. Brachiosaurus lived in what is now North America and East Africa during the late Jurassic period, around 150 to 145 million years ago. The skull of Brachiosaurus was relatively small, as in all sauropods, with nostrils positioned high on the head rather than at the front of the snout. The teeth were chisel-shaped and arranged around the front of the jaws. Brachiosaurus probably weighed around 50 to 60 tons, though weight estimates for these enormous animals are difficult to calculate with precision, and different paleontologists have proposed different estimates based on different assumptions about body proportions and tissue density. Diplodocus was another large sauropod from the late Jurassic period of North America, but it was built quite differently from Brachiosaurus. Diplodocus had a very long neck and an even longer tail, while with some individuals reaching total lengths of perhaps 25 to 30 meters, making it one of the longest dinosaurs known, though it was less massive than Brachiosaurus, probably weighing around 15 to 20 tons. The neck of Diplodocus was held more horizontally than that of Brachiosaurus, suggesting it fed primarily on low to medium-height vegetation rather than on the tops of tall trees. The tail of Diplodocus was extraordinary in its length and structure. It was composed of more than 80 vertebrae, becoming progressively thinner toward the tip, ending in a whip-like structure. Some paleontologists have suggested that Diplodocus could snap its tail like a whip, creating a loud cracking sound that might have been used for communication, for defense against predators, or for establishing dominance among members of the same species. Computer modeling of tail mechanics has shown that the tip of the tail could potentially have reached supersonic speeds, creating a sonic boom, though whether the tail structure could withstand the stresses involved in such rapid motion remains debated. Apatosaurus, formerly known as Brontosaurus and recently restored to use as a valid genus name for certain specimens following detailed anatomical studies, was another massive sauropod from the late Jurassic of North America. Apatosaurus was heavily built with a thick neck and massive body, and it probably weighed around 30 to 35 tons. Like Diplodocus, Apatosaurus had its teeth concentrated at the front of the jaws, and it probably fed by sweeping its head from side to side through low vegetation, like stripping large quantities of plant material and swallowing it for processing in its enormous digestive system. Camarasaurus was yet another common sauropod from the late Jurassic of North America, somewhat smaller than Brachiosaurus, Diplodocus, or Apatosaurus, but still a substantial animal, reaching lengths of about 15 to 20 meters and weights of perhaps 15 to 20 tons. Camarasaurus had a relatively short, thick neck compared to other sauropods and a relatively large head with robust, spoon-shaped teeth. These features suggest Camarasaurus may have fed on coarser, tougher vegetation than some other sauropods, perhaps including branches and woody material that required more powerful jaws and teeth to process. The abundance and diversity of sauropods during the late Jurassic period is remarkable and suggests that these animals were the dominant large herbivores in many ecosystems during this time. Evidence from trackways and from sites where multiple individuals have been found together suggests that at least some sauropods lived in herds, with individuals of different ages traveling together. Living in herds would have provided several advantages, particularly protection for young sauropods, which would have been vulnerable to predators until they reached substantial size. Adult sauropods were probably too large for most predators to tackle, but juveniles and subadults could have been targeted by the large theropod dinosaurs that were present during the Jurassic period. The impact of sauropod herds on vegetation would have been considerable. A herd of these enormous animals, each consuming hundreds of kilograms of plant material each day, would have stripped vegetation from large areas, creating disturbance that might have favored certain types of plants and affected the structure of plant communities. The dung produced by these herds would have been substantial, providing nutrients to the soil and affecting nutrient cycling in these ecosystems. Sauropod trails would have created pathways through forests and across landscapes that might have been used by other animals. While the sauropods were evolving toward gigantic sizes and becoming the dominant large herbivores in many Jurassic ecosystems, the theropod dinosaurs were diversifying into a wide variety of forms, adapted for different hunting strategies and different prey. The theropods of the Jurassic period ranged from small, agile predators weighing only a few kilograms to large apex predators weighing several tons. All theropods were bipedal, walking on their hind legs, which left their forelimbs free for grasping prey, manipulating objects, or in some lineages, evolving into wings for flight. Allosaurus was one of the most successful and well-known large predators of the late Jurassic period, particularly in North America, where it was the apex predator in many ecosystems. Allosaurus reached lengths of about 9 to 10 meters and weights estimated at around 2 to 3 tons, though some exceptionally large individuals may have been somewhat heavier. This dinosaur had a large skull, about 90 centimeters in length, with powerful jaws bearing dozens of sharp, serrated teeth designed for slicing through flesh. The skull of Allosaurus was built with numerous openings, both for muscle attachment and to reduce weight, and it was reinforced with bony struts and ridges that provided strength where it was needed while keeping overall weight minimal. The teeth of Allosaurus were constantly being replaced throughout the animal's life, with new teeth growing in to replace those that were broken or worn down, a feature common to most dinosaurs and to reptiles in general. The serrations on the teeth, on tiny ridges running along the front and back edges, helped the teeth cut through flesh and skin like the blade of a steak knife. The forelimbs of Allosaurus were relatively short compared to its body size, but were still substantial and powerful. Each hand bore 3 fingers, equipped with large curved claws. These arms and hands would have been useful for grasping struggling prey, holding onto a victim while the jaws delivered killing bites, or possibly for helping to tear chunks of flesh from carcasses. The hind limbs of Allosaurus were long and powerful, with 3 forward-facing toes bearing claws and a smaller first toe higher up on the foot that did not touch the ground. These legs would have enabled Allosaurus to walk and run, though exactly how fast this dinosaur could move remains a matter of debate among paleontologists. Evidence from fossils suggests that Allosaurus may have been capable of taking down prey larger than itself, possibly including young sauropods or even adults of smaller sauropod species. Some fossils show evidence of injuries that may have resulted from attacks on large prey, with broken bones that subsequently healed or with pathologies that might have resulted from stress or injury. Exactly how Allosaurus hunted large prey is uncertain. Some paleontologists have suggested that these predators hunted cooperatively in groups, working together to bring down prey too large for a single individual to handle, though evidence for social behavior in Allosaurus is limited, and alternative explanations for accumulations of fossils are possible. Ceratosaurus was another large predator from the late Jurassic period, a contemporary with Allosaurus, and found in some of the same locations, though less common in the fossil record. Ceratosaurus was similar in size to Allosaurus, but built somewhat differently, with a deeper body, a distinctive horn on its snout, and ridges above its eyes. The horn was probably too fragile to have been used as a weapon in combat with other large animals, but it may have served visual signaling purposes, perhaps for species recognition or for displays between individuals of the same species. Among the smaller theropods of the Jurassic period were various coelurosaurs, lightly built predators that would give rise to many important groups during the Cretaceous period, and that would eventually include the lineage leading to birds. These small theropods were generally swift runners with long legs, grasping hands with sharp claws, jaws and sharp teeth suitable for catching small prey like lizards, early mammals, insects, and possibly fish. Some of these small theropods may have been partially or entirely covered in primitive feathers, structures that initially evolved for insulation or display rather than for flight. The earliest evidence for feathers in dinosaurs comes not from the Jurassic period, but from the Cretaceous period, particularly from exceptional fossil deposits in China that preserve impressions of soft tissues, including feathers. However, the distribution of feathers among different groups of dinosaurs suggests that simple hair-like feathers probably evolved early in theropod evolution, possibly as early as the late Triassic or early Jurassic period, and that many theropods, not just those closely related to birds, possessed some form of feathery covering. The ornithischian dinosaurs, which had remained relatively rare and not particularly diverse during the Triassic and early Jurassic periods, began to diversify during the Middle and Late Jurassic period. One of the most distinctive groups of ornithischians to appear during this time was the stegosaurs, characterized by the distinctive plates and spikes along their backs and tails. These dinosaurs were quadrupedal herbivores with relatively small heads, robust bodies, and hind legs that were much longer than their front legs, giving them a distinctive sloping posture with the head held close to the ground. Stegosaurus, the most famous member of this group and the dinosaur from which the group takes its name, lived during the late Jurassic period in what is now the western United States. Stegosaurus reached lengths of about 9 meters and weighed approximately 5 tons. Along its back and tail were 2 rows of large, flat, roughly triangular plates, and at the tip of its tail were 4 long spikes. The largest plates could reach heights of about 60 centimeters and were positioned along the back in an alternating pattern, rather than forming matching pairs. The function of the plates on Stegosaurus has been debated by paleontologists for more than a century. Early interpretations suggested they served as armor, protecting the animal's back from predator attacks, but the plates were relatively thin and not particularly well positioned for defense, and there's little evidence that predators attacked stegosaurs from above. Another hypothesis is that the plates served a thermoregulatory function, helping the animal control its body temperature by changing blood flow to the plates and thus increasing or decreasing heat exchange with the environment. Studies of the internal structure of the plates have shown that they contain channels that probably housed blood vessels, supporting the thermoregulation hypothesis. The large surface area of the plates would have made them effective at absorbing or dissipating heat, and a stegosaur could potentially have warmed up more quickly in the morning by orienting its plates toward the sun, or could have cooled down by increasing blood flow to the plates and allowing heat to radiate away. A third possibility is that the plates served primarily for display, thus making the animal appear larger when viewed from the side, or providing visual signals for recognition among members of the same species or for mate attraction. It is possible that the plates served multiple functions simultaneously. The tail spikes of Stegosaurus, called thagomizers by modern paleontologists after a term coined in a comic strip, were almost certainly defensive weapons. These spikes were robust, positioned at the end of a muscular tail that could be swung from side to side, and they were capable of inflicting serious injury on an attacking predator. Evidence for the use of these tail spikes in defense includes injuries found on the bones of predatory dinosaurs, particularly on the bones of Allosaurus, that match the size and shape of Stegosaurus tail spikes and that show signs of infection or incomplete healing, suggesting they were inflicted during the predator's lifetime. The brain of Stegosaurus was remarkably small relative to its body size, weighing perhaps only 80 grams in an animal of 5 tons, giving this dinosaur one of the lowest brain-to-body mass ratios of any vertebrate. This small brain size led to the mistaken popular belief that stegosaurs had a second brain in their hip region to help control the hind legs and tail, but what was actually present was an enlargement of the spinal cord in the pelvic region, a feature also found in sauropods and in some other large dinosaurs. This enlargement, called the sacral plexus, helped coordinate the movements of the hind legs and tail, but was not an independent brain. Other ornithischians of the Jurassic period included various bipedal herbivores, ancestors of the diverse groups of ornithopods that would flourish during the Cretaceous period. These animals were generally smaller than the stegosaurs and sauropods, ranging from about 1 to 5 meters in length, and they probably filled ecological roles similar to those occupied by small to medium-sized mammalian herbivores in modern ecosystems. They had beaks at the front of their jaws for cropping vegetation and teeth further back for processing food, and they were probably swift runners, using speed and agility to escape from predators. As these herbivorous dinosaurs were diversifying and spreading across the landscapes of the Jurassic period, other groups of reptiles were adapting to life in the oceans. The seas of the Jurassic period were home to a diverse fauna of marine reptiles, including ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and marine crocodilians. These animals were not dinosaurs, but were contemporaries of dinosaurs, part of the diverse reptilian fauna of the Mesozoic era. The ichthyosaurs were among the most thoroughly adapted to marine life of all the marine reptiles. They had streamlined dolphin-like bodies with four paddle-like flippers, large tail fins for propulsion, and often dorsal fins on their backs. Ichthyosaurs were viviparous, giving birth to live young in the water rather than laying eggs, as evidenced by fossils of pregnant females with developing embryos inside their body cavities, and by fossils showing females in the process of giving birth. The ability to give birth to live young rather than having to come ashore to lay eggs as sea turtles do represented a complete adaptation to aquatic life. Ichthyosaurs had enormous eyes relative to their body size, among the largest eyes known from any animal. Some ichthyosaur eyes measured 25 centimeters in diameter, larger than a dinner plate. These huge eyes would have been particularly useful for seeing in deep or murky water where light levels were low, and they suggest that at least some ichthyosaurs hunted at significant depths or during twilight hours when visual detection of prey would have been challenging with smaller eyes. The teeth of ichthyosaurs were sharp and conical, well suited for grasping slippery prey like fish and squid. Stomach contents preserved in some ichthyosaur fossils confirm that they fed primarily on fish and cephalopods, though some larger species may have taken larger prey or even smaller marine reptiles. Some ichthyosaur fossils preserve remains of cephalopod hooklets in their stomach regions, the hard, indigestible parts of squid that accumulated over time, providing direct evidence of diet. The plesiosaurs were another major group of marine reptiles during the Jurassic period. Unlike ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs did not have streamlined fish-like bodies, but instead had broad, flattened bodies with four large, wing-like flippers used for underwater flight, a swimming method where the flippers moved up and down like wings to propel the animal through the water rather than side to side like the tail of a fish. Plesiosaurs are divided into two main groups based on body proportions. The plesiosauroids had very long necks, sometimes as long as the rest of the body, small heads, and relatively short tails. Some plesiosauroids had necks containing as many as 70 or more vertebrae, creating a long, flexible structure that could be curved and maneuvered in complex ways. These long-necked plesiosaurs probably fed primarily on fish, using their long necks to strike quickly at prey, though the exact function of such extremely long necks remains a subject of debate among paleontologists. Various hypotheses have been proposed, including that the long neck allowed the animal to approach prey with only its small head visible, avoiding spooking the fish with its large body, or that it allowed the animal to feed in different ways or in different parts of the water column. The pliosauroids, the other major group of plesiosaurs, had shorter necks, enormous heads with powerful jaws, and more robust builds overall. These animals were formidable predators, with some species reaching lengths of 10 to 15 meters and possessing skulls 2 to 3 meters long, filled with large conical teeth. Pliosauroids hunted large prey, probably including fish, other marine reptiles such as ichthyosaurs and smaller plesiosaurs, and possibly even early whales during the Cretaceous period. The bite force of large pleosauroids was probably among the highest of any marine predator, and their robust skulls and teeth were well suited for seizing and crushing large, struggling prey. Above the water, the pterosaurs were the dominant flying vertebrates throughout the Jurassic period. Pterosaurs had evolved by the late Triassic period, as mentioned earlier, but they diversified considerably during the Jurassic, then evolving a wide range of sizes and forms adapted to different lifestyles. The Jurassic pterosaurs included both primitive forms with long tails and more advanced forms with short tails, and they ranged in size from small animals with wingspans of less than a meter to larger species with wingspans of 2 meters or more. Rhamphorhynchus was a common late Jurassic pterosaur with a wingspan of about 1 to 2 meters. This pterosaur had a long tail with a diamond-shaped vein at the tip, which would have provided stability during flight and may have been used for steering. Rhamphorhynchus had numerous sharp teeth pointing forward from its jaws, well suited for catching fish, and fossils of this pterosaur have been found in marine deposits, sometimes with preserved stomach contents showing fish remains, confirming its diet. The wings of Rhamphorhynchus and other pterosaurs were formed from a membrane composed of skin, muscle, and other tissues. And recent studies have shown that this membrane was supported by internal fibers that provided strength and allowed for active control of wing shape during flight. Pterodactylus, which appeared during the late Jurassic period, was one of the first members of the short-tailed pterodactyloid group. This pterosaur was relatively small, with a wingspan of about 1 meter, and it had numerous small teeth. The ecology of Pterodactylus is less certain than that of Rhamphorhynchus, with different researchers suggesting it may have been an insect eater, a fish eater, or perhaps omnivorous, feeding on a variety of small prey. The short tail and other anatomical features of Pterodactylus represent the beginning of an evolutionary trend toward the body plan that would characterize most Cretaceous pterosaurs. Evidence suggests that pterosaurs were covered in a hair-like integument, providing insulation that would have been necessary if they were endothermic, generating their own body heat through metabolism. Fossils from exceptional preservation deposits have revealed impressions of this fuzzy covering, called pycnofibers, which covered the body and parts of the wings. The presence of this insulation, along with other anatomical features including large brains and sophisticated sense organs, suggests pterosaurs were probably active, warm-blooded animals, capable of sustained flight and activity, rather than the sluggish, cold-blooded creatures they were once thought to be. As the Jurassic period progressed, the continents continued to drift apart, creating new ocean basins and gradually isolating populations of organisms on different landmasses. This geographic isolation contributed to the diversification of dinosaurs and other organisms as populations on different continents evolved independently, adapting to local conditions and eventually diverging into distinct species. By the late Jurassic period, there were beginning to be differences in dinosaur faunas between different regions, though many groups remained cosmopolitan, present on multiple continents. The late Jurassic Morrison Formation of western North America has provided paleontologists with an extraordinarily rich record of dinosaur diversity during this time. This formation preserves sediments deposited in rivers, floodplains, and lakes across a vast area stretching from Montana to New Mexico, and it has yielded fossils of numerous dinosaur species, including Allosaurus, Ceratosaurus, Stegosaurus, Diplodocus, Apatosaurus, Brachiosaurus, Camarasaurus, and many others. The Morrison Formation also preserves fossils of other animals, including crocodilians, turtles, pterosaurs, early mammals, and various invertebrates, providing a comprehensive picture of late Jurassic ecosystems. The environment preserved in the Morrison Formation was seasonally dry, with distinct wet and dry seasons. During the wet season, rivers flowed vigorously and vegetation flourished, providing abundant food for herbivorous dinosaurs. During the dry season, water sources became scarce, and animals may have congregated around remaining water holes, leading to concentrations of fossils at certain sites where many animals died when water holes dried up completely, or where predators concentrated to hunt weakened prey. This pattern of seasonal variation in water availability was probably common in many regions during the Jurassic period and would have influenced the behavior and ecology of dinosaurs and other animals. The mammals of the Jurassic period remained small and relatively inconspicuous, living in the shadow of the dinosaurs and occupying ecological roles such as insectivory and small-scale omnivory that were not extensively exploited by dinosaurs. Jurassic mammals were diverse at small body sizes, with various lineages evolving different adaptations for different lifestyles. Some were terrestrial, scurrying through leaf litter and hunting insects. Others were adapted for climbing, living in trees and probably feeding on insects, small vertebrates, and perhaps plant material such as seeds and fruits. Still others may have been semi-aquatic or burrowing, though evidence for these lifestyles is limited. One remarkable Jurassic mammal was Castorocota from the Middle Jurassic of China, which possessed a flattened beaver-like tail and other adaptations, suggesting a semi-aquatic lifestyle. This mammal was probably around 40 centimeters in length and may have fed on fish and aquatic invertebrates, occupying a niche similar to that of modern river otters. The presence of fur is inferred from the evolutionary position of Castorocota within the mammal family tree. As all modern mammals have fur, and this feature probably evolved early in mammalian evolution. Another interesting Jurassic mammal was Fruitifossor from the late Jurassic of North America, which had large, powerful claws on its forelimbs and other features suggesting it may have dug for food, possibly feeding on insects like modern anteaters or aardvarks. The teeth of Fruitifossor were reduced and simple, consistent with a diet of soft-bodied insects that would not require extensive chewing. These specialized mammals demonstrate that even during the age of dinosaurs, mammals were evolving diverse adaptations and occupying a variety of ecological niches, though they remained constrained to small body sizes. The mammals were successfully exploiting niches that dinosaurs did not occupy, particularly nocturnal activity patterns. Most dinosaurs were probably diurnal, active during the day, while most Jurassic mammals were probably nocturnal, active at night. This difference in activity patterns would have reduced competition between the two groups and allowed them to coexist. The mammals were also evolving important features during the Jurassic period, including more sophisticated teeth for processing different types of food, enhanced sensory capabilities, particularly acute hearing, and a well-developed sense of smell, and possibly more complex behavior and parental care than most reptiles. As the Jurassic period drew to a close around 145 million years ago, there was no major mass extinction marking the boundary with the Cretaceous period. Instead, the transition was gradual. With continuing evolution and turnover of species, but no catastrophic event eliminating large portions of the biota. The Cretaceous period, which would last from approximately 145 million years ago to 66 million years ago, would see the dinosaurs reach their peak diversity and would also witness the evolution of flowering plants, the continued diversification of birds from theropod ancestors, and many other important developments in the history of life. The early Cretaceous period saw the continuing breakup of the supercontinents. South America and Africa were separating, though they remained connected by land bridges for some time, allowing animals to disperse between these landmasses. India was moving northward, having separated from Antarctica and Australia, beginning the long journey that would eventually lead to its collision with Asia and the formation of the Himalayan mountain range. The North Atlantic was widening as North America and Europe separated. These continental movements were slow, measured in centimeters per year, but over millions of years they resulted in increasing isolation of continental landmasses and increasing differences in dinosaur faunas between regions. The climate of the early Cretaceous period remained generally warm, continuing the pattern established during the Jurassic period. There was no ice at the poles, and temperatures in polar regions were mild enough to support forests and diverse animal communities. Fossils of dinosaurs, including large theropods and herbivores, have been found in rocks of Cretaceous age from northern Alaska and from Australia at locations that were within the Antarctic Circle during the Cretaceous period, demonstrating that dinosaurs were able to survive in these high-latitude environments despite the long periods of winter darkness. Sea levels fluctuated during the Cretaceous period, but were generally higher than at any time since the Paleozoic era. Shallow seas periodically inundated portions of the continents, creating extensive coastal environments and inland seaways. The Western Interior. Seaway, a shallow sea that extended from the Arctic Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico during the late Cretaceous period, divided North America into eastern and western portions and created extensive shoreline habitats. These shallow seas were home to diverse marine life, including fish, marine reptiles, ammonites, and many other organisms. The sauropods continued to be diverse and abundant during the early Cretaceous period, though the particular groups that were dominant changed from those of the Jurassic period. The diplodocids, which had been so successful and widespread during the late Jurassic, declined during the early Cretaceous and eventually went extinct, their place taken by other sauropod groups. The titanosaurs, a group of sauropods that had appeared during the late Jurassic period, became increasingly diverse and widespread during the Cretaceous period, and would persist until the very end of the age of dinosaurs. Titanosaurs were diverse in body form and size, ranging from relatively modest species, only about 7 or 8 meters in length, to gigantic forms that may have been the largest land animals ever to exist. Argentinosaurus from the Middle Cretaceous of Argentina is estimated to have reached lengths of 30 to 35 meters and weights of perhaps 60 to 100 metric tons, though these estimates are based on incomplete fossil remains and involve considerable uncertainty. Reconstructing the exact size and proportions of such enormous animals from fragmentary fossils is challenging, and different paleontologists have proposed different estimates based on different assumptions and methods. Many titanosaurs possessed osteoderms, bony plates embedded in their skin that provided additional protection. These osteoderms were especially well developed in some South American titanosaurs like Saltosaurus, where they formed a kind of armor covering the back and sides of the animal. The osteoderms varied in size, with some as small as a few centimeters and others much larger, and they were embedded in the skin overlying the back and flanks. The function of this armor may have been to protect against predators, particularly to protect juveniles or subadults that were large enough to be difficult prey, but not yet large enough to be essentially immune to predation. The theropod dinosaurs underwent significant diversification during the Cretaceous period, with several new groups appearing and radiating into diverse forms. The tyrannosauroids, a group of large predators that had been present but not particularly prominent during the Jurassic period, became larger and more diverse during the Cretaceous period, eventually producing some of the largest terrestrial carnivores ever to exist. The spinosaurids, a peculiar group of large theropods with elongated crocodile-like snouts and tall spines on their backs, appeared during the early Cretaceous period and were present in Africa, South America, Europe, and Asia. Spinosaurus from the Middle Cretaceous of North Africa is one of the most unusual and enigmatic large theropods. This dinosaur possessed a row of extremely tall neural spines on its back, extensions of the vertebrae that created a sail-like structure that may have reached heights of nearly 2 meters. The function of this sail has been debated extensively. Some researchers have suggested it served thermoregulatory purposes, helping the animal control its body temperature by changing blood flow to the sail, and thus increasing or decreasing heat exchange with the environment. Others have proposed that the sail was used for display, making the animal appear larger and more impressive to rivals or potential mates. Still others have suggested the sail may have supported a hump of fat or muscle, serving as an energy reserve. The skull of Spinosaurus was long and narrow with conical teeth, quite different from the deep, powerful skulls with blade-like teeth seen in most large predatory theropods. This unusual skull structure, along with other anatomical features, has led researchers to conclude that Spinosaurus probably fed primarily on fish, perhaps hunting in rivers and coastal waters. Yet recent discoveries and analyses have suggested that Spinosaurus may have been semi-aquatic, spending considerable time in water, an extremely unusual lifestyle for a large theropod. Features that support this interpretation include relatively short hind legs, a center of mass positioned unusually far forward, dense bones rather than the hollow bones typical of most theropods, and proportions of the limbs and tail that would have been useful for swimming. If these interpretations are correct, Spinosaurus represents a remarkable example of evolutionary adaptation, a lineage of terrestrial predatory dinosaurs that return to an aquatic lifestyle, much as various lineages of mammals have done throughout their evolutionary history, producing animals like whales, seals, and sea otters. The ecology of Spinosaurus would have been quite different from that of other large theropods, with this animal hunting fish and possibly other aquatic prey in rivers and estuaries rather than hunting large terrestrial herbivores on land. The Carcharodontosaurids were another group of large theropods that were particularly diverse during the early and middle Cretaceous period. These dinosaurs were similar in size to Tyrannosaurus rex, which would not appear until the late Cretaceous period, but they lived earlier and had differently shaped skulls and teeth. Carcharodontosaurus from the Middle Cretaceous of North Africa and Giganotosaurus from the Middle Cretaceous of South America were among the largest land predators ever to exist, with lengths estimated at 12 to 13 meters and weights of perhaps 6 to 8 tons. These enormous predators probably hunted large herbivorous dinosaurs, including sauropods, which remained abundant during the early and middle Cretaceous period. Hunting such large prey may have required cooperative behavior, with multiple individuals working together to bring down prey too large for a single predator to handle, though evidence for social behavior in these dinosaurs is limited and debated. Alternatively, these large predators may have hunted alone, targeting juveniles or weakened individuals, or they may have scavenged from carcasses as well as actively hunting, as most modern large predators do. The smaller coelurosaurs, lightly built theropods that had been present during the Jurassic period, underwent remarkable diversification during the Cretaceous period. This group includes the dromaeosaurids, often called raptors, which were generally small to medium-sized predators with a distinctive enlarged claw on the second toe of each foot. This claw could be held up off the ground while walking, keeping it sharp. Wedan deployed as a weapon when attacking prey, used for slashing or gripping the prey animal. Velociraptor, one of the most famous dromaeosaurids, lived during the late Cretaceous period in what is now Mongolia and northern China. This dinosaur was actually quite small, about 2 meters in length, and weighing perhaps 15 to 30 kilograms, much smaller than the large, intelligent predators depicted in popular movies. Velociraptor had a long, low skull with numerous sharp teeth, long arms with three-fingered hands bearing sharp claws, and the characteristic sickle-shaped claw on each foot. Evidence from fossils suggests that Velociraptor and other dromaeosaurids were covered in feathers, at least partially. Quill knobs, attachment points for flight feathers, have been found on the arm bones of some Velociraptor specimens, indicating that this animal had feathers on its arms, similar to those of birds, though Velociraptor was almost certainly flightless. The presence of feathers in Velociraptor is consistent with its position within the Coelurosaurs, a group that includes birds and many feathered non-avian dinosaurs, and it suggests that feathers were widespread among theropods, not just among those closely related to birds. One remarkable fossil, called the fighting dinosaurs specimen, preserves a velociraptor locked in combat with Protoceratops, a small ceratopsian dinosaur. The velociraptor appears to have its sickle claw embedded in the throat or neck region of the Protoceratops, while the Protoceratops has the arm of the velociraptor gripped in its beak. Both animals apparently died during this encounter and were buried rapidly, perhaps in a collapsing sand dune, preserving this moment of predator-prey interaction for millions of years and providing direct evidence of how these animals interacted in life. Deinonychus, a larger dromaeosaurid from the early Cretaceous of North America, was about 3 meters long and weighed perhaps 70 to 100 kilograms. The discovery and description of Deinonychus in the 1960s by paleontologist John Ostrom played an important role in changing scientific and popular perceptions of dinosaurs. Ostrom's work on Deinonychus highlighted the possibility that at least some dinosaurs were active, agile, possibly warm-blooded animals, rather than the slow, sluggish, cold-blooded creatures they had often been portrayed as in earlier decades. And this interpretation helped spark what has been called the dinosaur renaissance in paleontology. The Coelurosaurs also included many lineages that evolved towards smaller sizes and more specialized diets. The ornithomimosaurs, or ostrich dinosaurs, were lightly built theropods with long legs, long necks, small heads, and toothless beaks. They probably fed on a variety of foods, including plants, small animals, and insects, and they were probably swift runners, using speed to escape from predators. Some ornithomimosaurs reached considerable sizes, with individuals up to 4 or 5 meters in length, but they were built lightly and probably weighed only a few hundred kilograms at most. The oviraptorosaurs were another group of specialized coelurosaurs, characterized by short, deep skulls, often with elaborate crests and powerful beaks. The diet of oviraptorosaurs has been debated, with early researchers suggesting they fed on eggs, hence the name oviraptor meaning egg thief. But later discoveries have suggested they may have been omnivorous or even herbivorous. Some oviraptorosaurs have been found in nesting positions on top of clutches of eggs, suggesting they provided parental care by brooding their nests, sitting on the eggs to keep them warm, similar to modern birds. This behavior would have required the adult to remain on the nest for extended periods, implying significant investment in parental care. The therizinosaurs were among the most unusual theropods, having evolved from carnivorous ancestors but adapted to herbivory. They possessed long necks, small heads with simple leaf-shaped teeth, suitable for processing plant material, Bulky bodies to accommodate the large digestive systems needed for processing plant matter, and enormous claws on their hands that may have been used for pulling down branches or for defense. Some therizinosaurs reached large sizes, with Therizinosaurus from the late Cretaceous of Mongolia estimated at about 5 meters tall when standing upright and weighing perhaps 5 tons. The claws on the hands of Therizinosaurus were extraordinarily long, reaching lengths of about 70 centimeters, making them among the longest claws known from any animal. Among the most significant evolutionary developments of the Cretaceous period was the continued evolution of birds from theropod dinosaur ancestors. Birds had already appeared during the late Jurassic period, with Archaeopteryx representing an early bird with a mix of avian and dinosaurian features. But during the Cretaceous period, birds diversified considerably, with many lineages evolving that were more advanced than Archaeopteryx in their flight capabilities and other features. The progression toward more modern bird anatomy was gradual, occurring over tens of millions of years during the Cretaceous period. Some Cretaceous birds retained teeth, while others evolved toothless beaks. Some retained long bony tails composed of many vertebrae, while others evolved the shortened fused tail structure seen in modern birds, called a pygostyle, which supports the tail feathers. Some retained clawed fingers on their wings, while others lost these claws. Different lineages evolved different combinations of features. And by the late Cretaceous period, there was considerable diversity in bird anatomy and ecology. Confuciusornis, from the early Cretaceous of China, was a crow-sized bird that retained claws on its wings but had evolved a toothless beak. This bird is known from hundreds of specimens, making it one of the best-known early birds. Many specimens of Confuciusornis show sexual dimorphism, with males possessing very long tail feathers that may have reached lengths of up to 30 centimeters, while females lacked these ornaments. This pattern suggests that sexual selection was operating, with females choosing mates based on tail ornamentation, a pattern common in many modern birds. Hesperornis and Ichthyornis from the late Cretaceous of North America were adapted to marine environments. Hesperornis was a large, flightless diving bird with reduced wings and powerful legs for swimming, somewhat similar to modern loons or grebes, but more specialized for aquatic life. Hesperornis retained teeth, unlike modern birds, and it probably fed on fish caught during dives. Ichthyornis was a flying seabird, somewhat similar to modern gulls or terns, also with teeth, and probably also feeding primarily on fish. These marine birds demonstrate that birds had already diversified into aquatic habitats during the Cretaceous period, exploiting the abundant marine resources available in the warm, shallow seas of that time. By the late Cretaceous period, some bird lineages had evolved that would survive the end Cretaceous extinction and give rise to all modern birds. These included ancestors of modern ratites, the group that includes ostriches, emus, and kiwis, ancestors of waterfowl such as ducks and geese, and ancestors of various other groups. The diversity of birds during the late Cretaceous was considerable, though still much less than the diversity that would evolve during the Cenozoic era after the extinction of non-avian dinosaurs removed competition and opened up new ecological opportunities. The Ornithischian dinosaurs underwent major diversification during the Cretaceous period, evolving into many of the most recognizable and diverse groups. The ornithopods, bipedal herbivores that had been present in relatively simple forms during the Jurassic period, evolved into a remarkable variety of forms during the Cretaceous. The iguanodonts, which appeared during the early Cretaceous period, were large ornithopods with thumb spikes that may have been used for defense or for processing vegetation. Iguanodon, from the early Cretaceous of Europe, was one of the first dinosaurs to be scientifically described in the early 19th century, and it remains one of the most important dinosaurs in the history of paleontology. Iguanodon was about 9 to 10 meters long and weighed perhaps 3 to 4 tons. It could walk on all fours when moving slowly, but could rear up on its hind legs to run or to reach high vegetation. The thumb spike was a conical structure of bone that could have been used as a weapon against predators or possibly in combat with other members of the same species. The other fingers were more flexible and could have been used for grasping vegetation. From iguanodont ancestors evolved the hadrosaurs, or duck-billed dinosaurs, which became among the most diverse and abundant large herbivores during the late Cretaceous period. Hadrosaurs were characterized by their broad, duck-like beaks, their batteries of hundreds of small teeth for grinding plant material, and in many species by elaborate crests on their heads. The teeth of hadrosaurs were arranged in dental batteries, with multiple rows of teeth packed tightly together, creating an effective grinding surface that was constantly renewed as old teeth wore down and new teeth grew in from below to replace them. This dental system was well suited for processing tough plant material and represents a sophisticated adaptation for herbivory. Different hadrosaur species possess different types of crests. Parasaurolophus had a long, curved tubular crest extending backward from the skull, sometimes reaching lengths of up to 1.5 meters. Corythosaurus had a rounded helmet-like crest. Lambeosaurus had crests of various shapes depending on the species, some with forward-pointing projections and some with more rounded profiles. Edmontosaurus had no prominent crest at all, or only a small fleshy crest that would not preserve in fossils. The crests of hadrosaurs were hollow, containing passages connected to the nasal passages, and they functioned in sound production. Air passing through these passages would have resonated, creating sounds that could have been used for communication. Different crest shapes would have produced different sounds, possibly allowing members of different species to recognize each other or allowing individuals to identify potential mates. Computer modeling of hadrosaur crests has shown that they would have produced low-frequency sounds, deep resonant calls that could have carried over considerable distances, allowing hadrosaurs to communicate across their environments. The ceratopsians, or horned dinosaurs, were another major group of ornithischians that diversified during the Cretaceous period. Early ceratopsians, which appeared during the early Cretaceous period in Asia, were small bipedal herbivores, but the group evolved toward larger sizes and quadrupedal locomotion, eventually producing some of the most massive and distinctive herbivorous dinosaurs. Psittacosaurus from the early Cretaceous of Asia was a relatively small bipedal ceratopsian about 2 meters long. It had a beak similar to that of a parrot, hence its name, which means parrot lizard, and a small frill at the back of its skull, a feature that would become greatly enlarged in later ceratopsians. Psittacosaurus is one of the best-known dinosaurs from the early Cretaceous of Asia, with hundreds of specimens discovered, including many juveniles, providing detailed information about growth and development in this species. Some specimens preserve evidence of bristle-like structures along the tail, possibly a form of primitive feather or a unique integumentary structure found only in this group. The later ceratopsians, particularly those of the late Cretaceous of North America, were much larger and possessed elaborate horns and frills. Triceratops, perhaps the most famous ceratopsian, lived at the very end of the Cretaceous period and was one of the last dinosaurs to exist before the mass extinction. One Triceratops was a massive animal, about 8 to 9 meters long and weighing perhaps 6 to 12 tons. It had 3 horns, one above each eye and one on its nose, and a large bony frill extending backward from its skull. The frill was solid bone in Triceratops, unlike in some other ceratopsians where the frill had large openings covered with skin. The function of the horns and frills in ceratopsians has been extensively debated by paleontologists. The horns were certainly capable of serving as weapons, and there is evidence of horn wounds in some specimens, suggesting combat between individuals. Some specimens show partially healed injuries that match the size and shape of ceratopsian horns, supporting the interpretation that these animals sometimes fought each other, possibly over territory or access to mates. The frills may have served multiple functions, including protection for the neck, muscle attachment for powerful jaw muscles, thermoregulation through blood flow to the frill, and display for species recognition or mate attraction. Different ceratopsian species had differently shaped frills and horns, supporting the idea that these features were important for visual recognition. The pachycephalosaurs, or thick-headed dinosaurs, were another distinctive group of late Cretaceous ornithischians. These were bipedal herbivores characterized by enormously thickened skull roofs, with some species having domes of bone up to 25 centimeters thick on top of their heads. The function of these thickened skulls has been much debated. The traditional interpretation, not based on the robust construction of the skull domes and the structure of the neck vertebrae, is that males engaged in head-butting contests for dominance or access to mates, similar to the behavior seen in modern bighorn sheep or musk oxen. However, some researchers have questioned whether the skulls were actually strong enough to withstand repeated high-impact collisions without injury, and have suggested alternative functions such as flank butting, where animals would ram each other in the sides rather than head-to-head, or display, where the thick skulls served primarily as visual signals rather than as weapons. Analysis of the internal structure of pachycephalosaur skulls has shown that they were constructed to absorb and distribute impact forces, supporting the head-butting hypothesis, though the debate continues. The ankylosaurs, the heavily armored quadrupedal herbivores, also reached their peak diversity during the late Cretaceous period. Ankylosaurs were covered in bony plates and spikes embedded in their skin, providing extensive protection against predators. Some ankylosaurs possessed large clubs at the ends of their tails, formed from fused vertebrae and enlarged osteoderms, capable of being swung with considerable force as a defensive weapon. Ankylosaurus, from the very end of the Cretaceous period of North America, was one of the largest members of the group, reaching lengths of about 6 to 7 meters and weighing perhaps 6 tons. The armor of ankylosaurs consisted of osteoderms of various sizes and shapes, ranging from small pebble-like structures to large plates and spikes. These osteoderms were embedded in the skin and in some cases fused to underlying bones, creating a rigid protective covering. The tail club of advanced ankylosaurs like Ankylosaurus was a sophisticated structure with the last several tail vertebrae fused together and surrounded by large osteoderms, creating a heavy mass that could be swung by powerful tail muscles. Biomechanical analysis suggests that the tail club could have been swung with enough force to break bones, making it an effective defensive weapon against large predatory theropods. During the middle portion of the Cretaceous period, a major innovation in plant evolution occurred that would have profound and lasting effects on terrestrial ecosystems. The angiosperms, or flowering plants, appeared and began to diversify. The exact timing and location of the origin of flowering plants remains somewhat uncertain because the earliest fossil evidence is fragmentary and difficult to interpret. But by the Middle Cretaceous period, Around 110 to 100 million years ago, flowering plants were clearly present and beginning to spread across the landscape. Flowering plants differ from earlier seed plants, the gymnosperms like conifers and cycads, in several important ways. They produce flowers, specialized reproductive structures that often attract animal pollinators with colors, scents, and nectar rewards, creating mutually beneficial relationships between plants and pollinators. They produce fruits, structures that develop from the flower after pollination and that enclose and protect seeds while also often facilitating seed dispersal by animals that eat the fruits and deposit the seeds elsewhere. Flowering plants also typically grow faster and reproduce more quickly than most gymnosperms, allowing them to colonize disturbed areas and to respond more rapidly to environmental changes. The rise of flowering plants during the Cretaceous period had cascading effects on ecosystems. The relationships between flowering plants and their pollinators, particularly insects, drove diversification in both groups, with plants evolving flowers adapted to particular pollinators and insects evolving specialized mouthparts and behaviors for exploiting particular types of flowers. Bees, butterflies, moths, and many other groups of insects diversified during the Cretaceous period in association with the radiation of flowering plants, creating the complex pollination networks that characterize modern terrestrial ecosystems. The evolution of fruits created new food sources for animals and new mechanisms for seed dispersal. Animals that consumed fruits obtained nutrition while simultaneously serving as agents of seed dispersal, carrying seeds away from the parent plant and depositing them elsewhere, often in dung that provided fertilizer for germinating seedlings. This mutualistic relationship benefited both the plants, which gained an effective means of dispersal, and the animals, which gained a food source. For herbivorous dinosaurs, the spread of flowering plants provided new types of vegetation to feed on. Flowering plants often produce leaves, fruits, and seeds that are more nutritious and more digestible than the leaves and seeds of many gymnosperms, which are often defended by tough tissues, resins, and toxic chemicals. However, it is important to note that many groups of herbivorous dinosaurs had already been successful feeding on gymnosperms and ferns for more than 100 million years before flowering plants appeared. So the impact of flowering plants on dinosaur evolution should not be overstated. Dinosaurs were well adapted to the plant communities that existed throughout the Mesozoic era, and the rise of flowering plants was simply one of many environmental changes to which dinosaurs responded. As the Cretaceous period progressed and the continents continued to drift apart, the isolation of different landmasses led to increasing differences in dinosaur faunas between regions. By the late Cretaceous period, around 80 to 70 million years ago, there were distinct assemblages of dinosaurs in North America, South America, Asia, Europe, Africa, and the southern continents that would become Australia and Antarctica. Some groups remained widespread, present on multiple continents, but others were restricted to particular regions, reflecting both their evolutionary history and the barriers to dispersal created by the separation of continents and the presence of seaways. In North America, during the late Cretaceous period, the western interior seaway divided the continent into eastern and western portions. The western portion, a narrow strip of land called Laramidia stretching from Alaska to Mexico, was home to a diverse fauna of dinosaurs, including tyrannosaurids, hadrosaurs, ceratopsians, ankylosaurs, pachycephalosaurs, and various smaller theropods. The eastern portion, called Appalachia, is less well known paleontologically due to less extensive fossil deposits and because much of the rock from this region has been eroded or buried, but it appears to have had a somewhat different dinosaur fauna, possibly with different groups of theropods and ornithischians than those found in Laramidia. The tyrannosaurids reached their peak diversity and size during the late Cretaceous period of North America and Asia. These large predatory theropods were characterized by massive skulls, powerful jaws with large teeth, reduced forelimbs with only 2 functional fingers, and robust hind limbs. Tyrannosaurus rex, which lived during the very last portion of the Cretaceous period in western North America, from about 68 to 66 million years ago, was one of the largest and most powerful terrestrial predators ever to exist. Tyrannosaurus rex could reach lengths of about 12 to 13 meters and heights of about 4 meters at the hips. Weight estimates vary depending on the method used and the assumptions made about body proportions and muscle mass, but most paleontologists estimate that adult Tyrannosaurus rex weighed between 6 and 9 tons, with some exceptionally large individuals possibly reaching 10 or 11 tons. The skull of Tyrannosaurus rex was massive, up to 1.5 meters in length in the largest individuals, with deep jaws and teeth that in some cases exceeded 30 centimeters in length, including the root portion embedded in the jaw. The teeth of Tyrannosaurus rex were thick and robust, quite different from the blade-like teeth of many other large predatory theropods like Allosaurus or Carcharodontosaurus. This design sacrificed some cutting ability for strength, allowing the teeth to withstand the tremendous forces generated when biting into bone. Studies of bite force in Tyrannosaurus rex, using various methods including analysis of tooth marks on bones and biomechanical modeling, have estimated bite forces ranging from about 12,000 to over 20,000 newtons, among the highest bite forces known for any terrestrial animal. This enormous bite force, combined with teeth designed to crush rather than just slice, it suggests that Tyrannosaurus rex not only consumed the flesh of its prey, but also crunched through bones to access marrow and extract every possible bit of nutrition from carcasses. The forelimbs of Tyrannosaurus rex were remarkably small relative to the size of the animal, measuring less than 1 meter in length in an animal 12 meters long. This has led to much speculation and some humor about their function, with suggestions ranging from their use in mating to helping the animal rise from a resting position to serving no important function at all. Despite their small size, the arms were muscular and bore 2 clawed fingers. Recent studies have suggested they may have been capable of lifting several hundred kilograms, which is substantial, though perhaps not particularly useful for an animal of this size. The reduction of the forelimbs in tyrannosaurids probably reflects an evolutionary shift toward emphasis on the skull and jaws as the primary tools for capturing and processing prey, with the forelimbs becoming less important and consequently reduced in size. Other tyrannosaurids were present in Asia during the late Cretaceous period, including Tarbosaurus, which was very similar to Tyrannosaurus rex in size and appearance, and smaller tyrannosaurids like Albertosaurus and Gorgosaurus in North America. These animals were the apex predators in their ecosystems, hunting the large herbivorous dinosaurs that were abundant during the late Cretaceous period, particularly hadrosaurs and ceratopsians. The hadrosaurs and ceratopsians were particularly diverse and abundant in North America during the late Cretaceous period, serving as the primary large herbivores in many ecosystems and presumably forming the main prey base for large predators like Tyrannosaurus rex. Different species of hadrosaurs and ceratopsians often lived in the same regions and at the same times, suggesting they partitioned resources in some way, perhaps feeding at different heights, on different types of vegetation, or in different microhabitats within the same general area. Evidence from trackways and from bone beds where many individuals have been found together suggests that at least some hadrosaurs and ceratopsians lived in herds. Large herds of herbivorous dinosaurs moving through late Cretaceous landscapes would have had major impacts on vegetation, consuming vast quantities of plant material, trampling vegetation, dispersing seeds in their dung, and creating trails in cleared areas. The social behavior of these animals remains a subject of investigation, with questions about herd structure, whether different age groups traveled together or separately, and how these animals communicated and coordinated their movements. In South America during the late Cretaceous period, the dinosaur fauna was quite different from that of North America. South America had separated from Africa and was largely isolated, though there may have been occasional land connections to North America, allowing some faunal exchange. The large predators in South America during the late Cretaceous were not tyrannosaurids, which never reached South America, but rather abelisaurids, a group of theropods with deep short skulls and extremely reduced forelimbs, even more reduced than those of tyrannosaurids. La Carnotaurus from the late Cretaceous of Argentina was a medium-sized abelisaurid about 7 to 9 meters long. It had an extremely deep skull with two horn-like protrusions above the eyes and very short, stumpy forelimbs that appear to have been nearly functionless, even more reduced than those of Tyrannosaurus rex. The skull of Carnotaurus was unusual in being very short from front to back and very deep from top to bottom, quite different from the long, low skulls of most theropods. One specimen of Carnotaurus preserves impressions of the skin, showing that this dinosaur had non-overlapping scales and possibly some larger button-like osteoderms, providing rare direct evidence of dinosaur skin texture. The herbivorous dinosaurs of late Cretaceous South America included titanosaur sauropods, which were diverse and abundant, representing the last major radiation of long-necked dinosaurs, and some ornithischians, including ankylosaurs. The titanosaurs of South America included some of the largest dinosaurs known, including Argentinosaurus, Patagodoton, and Puertosaurus, all estimated at weights of perhaps 70 to 100 tons, though these estimates remain uncertain due to incomplete fossil material. In Asia during the late Cretaceous period, the dinosaur faunas included tyrannosaurids like Tarbosaurus, hadrosaurs including species with elaborate crests, various therizinosaurs with their unusual herbivorous adaptations, oviraptorosaurs with their elaborate crests and brooding behavior, dromaeosaurids including velociraptor and related forms, and protoceratopsids, smaller relatives of the large ceratopsians of North America. The Gobi Desert of Mongolia and northern China has been particularly productive for late Cretaceous dinosaur fossils, with exceptional preservation in some formations, allowing for detailed study of anatomy and, in some cases, preservation of soft tissues or delicate structures. The pterosaurs continued to evolve during the Cretaceous period, reaching their greatest sizes during the late Cretaceous. The largest flying animals ever to exist were late Cretaceous pterosaurs of the family Azhdarchidae. These enormous animals had wingspans estimated at 10 to 11 meters, or possibly even more in the case of Quetzalcoatlus from the late Cretaceous of North America. Despite their enormous wingspans, Azhdarchids probably weighed only about 200 to 250 kilograms, with extremely thin-walled. The hollow bones and extensive air sacs throughout their bodies to minimize weight. The Azhdarchids had very long necks, very long legs relative to other pterosaurs, and relatively short wings compared to their overall size. Their skulls were long and pointed, and they lacked teeth. The ecology of these enormous pterosaurs has been much debated. Some researchers have suggested they were soaring animals, using thermals and updrafts to stay aloft with minimal energy expenditure, and scanning the ground for carcasses to scavenge, similar to modern vultures, though much larger. Others have suggested they were more terrestrial than most pterosaurs, stalking through forests or along shorelines on their long legs and using their long beaks to catch small animals, perhaps similar to modern ground hornbills or storks, but again, much larger. Smaller pterosaurs persisted through the late Cretaceous period, including various forms with elaborate crests and varied dental arrangements reflecting different diets and feeding strategies. However, the overall diversity of pterosaurs during the late Cretaceous was somewhat reduced compared to earlier periods, with some groups that had been common during the Jurassic and early Cretaceous having gone extinct or declined. This decline may have been related to competition with birds, which were becoming increasingly diverse and occupying similar ecological niches, though other factors may also have played a role. The seas of the late Cretaceous period were home to diverse marine life, including mosasaurs, large marine reptiles that had appeared during the Middle Cretaceous period and had undergone rapid diversification, becoming the dominant marine predators in many oceans by the late Cretaceous. Mosasaurs were related to modern monitor lizards and had elongated bodies, paddle-like limbs, and powerful tails for propulsion. They ranged in size from about 3 meters to more than 15 meters in length, and they fed on a variety of prey, including fish, sea turtles, ammonites, and other marine reptiles, including smaller mosasaurs. The plesiosaurs, which had been dominant marine predators during the Jurassic period, persisted through most of the Cretaceous period but declined in diversity during the late Cretaceous, possibly due to competition with mosasaurs. The ichthyosaurs, those dolphin-like marine reptiles, had already gone extinct during the Middle Cretaceous period. For reasons that remain unclear but that may have involved changes in ocean chemistry, changes in prey populations, or competition with other marine predators. The last portion of the Cretaceous period, from about 75 to 66 million years ago, saw the dinosaurs at their peak diversity. Terrestrial ecosystems were complex and well-established, with diverse assemblages of herbivorous dinosaurs including sauropods, hadrosaurs, ceratopsians, ankylosaurs, and pachycephalosaurs. Predatory dinosaurs including tyrannosaurids, abelisaurids, dromaeosaurids, and various smaller theropods. Pterosaurs flying through the skies, birds diversifying into many forms, and numerous other animals including crocodilians, lizards, snakes, turtles, and mammals. 66 million years ago, this world came to an abrupt end. An asteroid approximately 10 to 15 kilometers in diameter struck the Earth in what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. The impact created the Chicxulub crater, more than 150 kilometers in diameter, and released energy estimated at more than 1 billion times the energy of the atomic bombs used during World War II. The immediate effects were catastrophic. Tsunamis hundreds of meters high radiated outward from the impact site, inundating coastal areas thousands of kilometers away. Earthquakes, some of magnitude 10 or higher, shook the planet. The heat of the impact ignited global wildfires, with burning debris falling back through the atmosphere and setting vegetation ablaze across vast areas. The longer-term effects were equally devastating. Dust and aerosols thrown into the atmosphere blocked sunlight, causing temperatures to plummet and photosynthesis to cease or greatly diminish worldwide. This impact winter may have lasted for months or perhaps years, during which time plants died from lack of sunlight, herbivores starved as their food sources disappeared, and carnivores lost their prey. When the dust finally settled, sulfur aerosols released by the impact remained in the atmosphere, causing acid rain that damaged surviving plants and acidified lakes and rivers. Eventually, the carbon dioxide released by the impact and by the widespread wildfires caused global warming, a greenhouse effect that would have brought new challenges for any organisms that had survived the initial impact and the impact winter. The oceans became acidic and lost oxygen in many areas. Plankton, the microscopic organisms that form the base of marine food webs, died in massive numbers, causing the collapse of marine ecosystems. Ammonites, those shelled cephalopods that had been diverse and abundant for hundreds of millions of years, went extinct completely. Many species of fish, marine reptiles, and marine invertebrates disappeared. On land, all non-avian dinosaurs went extinct. Every lineage of dinosaurs except those that had evolved into birds disappeared forever. The pterosaurs went extinct completely, with no survivors. Many groups of other animals also suffered heavy losses. The extinction that followed, called the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction, or KPG extinction, eliminated approximately 75% of all species on Earth. The selectivity of the extinction provides important clues about what factors determine survival. Animals that required large amounts of food, such as large herbivores and the carnivores that depended on them, were particularly vulnerable. Large body size was a disadvantage, as large animals need more food and have slower reproductive rates. Animals that could survive for long periods with limited food, such as scavengers, detritivores, and animals capable of entering dormancy or hibernation, had better survival rates. Freshwater ecosystems, where animals could feed on detritus and organic material that accumulated in sediments even when photosynthesis was limited, had higher survival rates than many terrestrial and marine ecosystems. Among the survivors were certain lineages of birds, probably small, generalist birds that could feed on seeds which can remain viable in soil for extended periods, or on insects and other invertebrates that feed on detritus. The exact characteristics that allowed these particular bird lineages to survive while so many other groups went extinct remain uncertain and continue to be investigated by paleontologists. The mammals also survived, though many Cretaceous mammal lineages went extinct. The survivors were generally small, probably nocturnal or capable of sheltering underground, and able to survive on varied diets. Crocodilians survived, as did turtles, lizards, and snakes, though all of these groups suffered some extinctions. The survival of crocodilians is particularly noteworthy because they were large animals requiring substantial food, yet they survived when other large reptiles like non-avian dinosaurs went extinct. Possible explanations include their semi-aquatic lifestyle, which provided access to aquatic food sources, and their ability to go for long periods without eating, their cold-blooded metabolism, which requires less food than warm-blooded metabolism, and perhaps some degree of chance in which particular populations happen to be in locations where conditions were favorable for survival. The recovery of life after the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction was slow, taking hundreds of thousands to millions of years for ecosystems to rebuild and for biodiversity to begin to approach pre-extinction levels. The world that emerged was fundamentally different from the world that had existed before. The age of dinosaurs was over. The age of mammals was beginning. Birds, the living descendants of dinosaurs, continued to evolve and diversify. but they would never again reach the size range or ecological diversity of their non-avian dinosaur ancestors during the Mesozoic era. The dinosaurs had dominated terrestrial ecosystems for more than 160 million years, a span of time vast beyond human comprehension, longer than the entire time since the extinction, longer than mammals have been the dominant large land animals. They evolved from small bipedal predators into an extraordinary variety of forms, from tiny bird-like creatures to the largest land animals ever to walk the earth. They adapted to changing climates, to the breakup of Pangaea and the formation of new continents, to the evolution of new plant groups, to competition with each other and with other organisms. The dinosaurs were not evolutionary failures, but they were extraordinarily successful animals that thrived for an immense span of time. Their extinction was not due to any inherent flaw or inadequacy, but was the result of an unpredictable catastrophic event, an asteroid impact that even the most successful and well-adapted organisms could not survive. In the vast lottery of survival during mass extinctions, the dinosaurs, except for the birds, were unlucky. The legacy of the dinosaurs persists in the birds that fill our skies and our lives today. Every bird, from the smallest hummingbird to the largest ostrich, is a dinosaur, a direct descendant of the theropod dinosaurs that lived alongside Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops. When we watch a bird fly or hear a bird sing, we are witnessing behaviors that have their roots in the age of dinosaurs, refined and modified by millions of years of evolution, but fundamentally connected to that vanished world. The study of dinosaurs continues to reveal new insights into the history of life on Earth, into the processes of evolution and extinction, into the dynamics of ancient ecosystems. New fossils are discovered regularly, sometimes filling in gaps in our knowledge, sometimes revealing entirely new groups or unexpected features. New analytical techniques allow paleontologists to extract more information from fossils, to reconstruct soft tissues and colors, to analyze growth rates and metabolic rates, to understand behavior and ecology in increasing detail. The age of dinosaurs represents a vast chapter in Earth's history, a time when reptiles rather than mammals dominated terrestrial ecosystems, when the largest land animals ever to exist walked the Earth, when pterosaurs soared through Mesozoic skies. It was a time of remarkable diversity and evolutionary innovation, a time when life responded to changing conditions with new adaptations and new forms, a time that lasted for more than 160 million years and that shaped the Earth in ways that persist to this day. In the quiet depths of geological time, the dinosaurs lived and evolved and eventually, with the exception of the birds, went extinct. Their fossils remain preserved in rock, windows into a vanished world, evidence of the diversity and adaptability of life, reminders of the vast timescales of Earth history and of the unpredictable nature of extinction. The story of the dinosaurs is a story of evolution, of diversification, of adaptation to changing environments, and ultimately of extinction. A story that continues to inspire wonder and to inform our understanding of life's history on our ancient planet.